Hello and a very warm welcome to the channel. So I've got another American reaction video for you guys. This is the NFL. So I've done loads on college football, which is amazing because the idea of a student sport, university sport, could be such a huge deal, could be one of the biggest leagues in the country, is just crazy. So I haven't got my head around that, but trying. But I thought it'd be good to do some on the actual biggest league in America. So this is the how every team got its name and identity, and it's from the NFL Throwback trailer. So I think it should be really interesting. Now it is a half-an-hour video, so I'm gonna have to try and talk less than usual because otherwise it's gonna be stupidly long, and like I want you guys to see your families again. Okay, like I don't want this to be the end. So sit back, enjoy, and let's go. Let's
go. The NFL is currently made up of 32 different franchises, but did you know over 75 have existed in league history? We're turning back the gridiron clock. It's the official evolution of the NFL.
So this is something I really want to get my head around, is the franchise system. Because if you had that in the UK, like 75 franchises, and there's now, what, 32 of them are left? If in the UK you had this franchise system and you tried to move a team from one town to another, the country would burn down. There would be massive riots, and I'm not even exaggerating on that. So I'm really interested in how this franchise system works.
100 years in the making.
Yeah.
The NFL was born in 1920, known originally as the American Professional Football Association. It started with 14 teams, 12 of them clumped together in the Midwest, okay. 2 others playing in New York.
And in order to join this group, you had to put up $100 for a franchise.
You'll notice many of the early franchises didn't even have official team logos. That's because teams were so informal back then, they just didn't even create them.
Okay.
Jim Thorpe was unanimously elected president because of the name recognition that he could garner for this National Pro Football League.
Of the 14 original teams, only 2 would stick around to celebrate the league's 100th anniversary. The Decatur Staleys, known today as the Chicago Bears, and the oldest team in the NFL, the Chicago Cardinals, who have since built their nest in Arizona.
The story behind the Cardinals name really goes back to Chris O'Brien when he purchased the uniforms that the Cardinals were going to wear. He purchased them from the Chicago Maroons, and they were faded, and somebody referred to the jerseys as maroon color, and he said, those aren't maroon, that's cardinal red, and that cardinal name stuck.
While those 2 franchises are the oldest in the game, they did not win.
That's a cool name. That's a cool name.
League's first ever title. That distinction belongs to the Akron Pros, who finished that inaugural season undefeated at 8-0-3. Yes, 3 ties.
So in terms of the actual origins of American football, please correct me if I'm wrong, I might be wrong, but I've heard it has a lot to do with rugby, but essentially rugby was played a lot in American universities. Obviously rugby is still a massive game in the UK. Rugby was played in American universities and colleges, and over time kind of the rules adapted and it became a completely different sport. Please do correct me if I'm wrong though, but that's kind of my understanding.
Pros weren't just the league's first champions either. They were also the first team in the league to break the color barrier.
That's cool.
The Akron Pros are one of those teams that are lost to history, but Fritz Pollard was both a player and a coach for that Akron Pros team.
And since diamond-filled Super Bowl rings were clearly not the rage just yet, all the Pros players received this tiny gold football pendant for their efforts. The Pros were also the first and last recipients of the league's championship trophy, known as the Brunswick Balky Colander Cup, which to this day represents...
That's a snappy name.
That's one of the greatest mysteries in
Brunswick Balky Colander Cup.
NFL lore. It was lost after that first season, and this is the only known picture of it.
Oh, shit.
Following the league's first year, 2 teams renamed themselves, and 1 moved. The Decatur Staleys, setting up shop in Chicago and winning their first ever championship while they were at it. The Chicago Tigers, meanwhile, folded, but 8 new teams joined. The league was now up to 21 teams, all still located in Midwestern and Eastern states. Several of the new additions didn't last long. The Tonawanda Cardex, holding the ultimate one-hit wonder crown, playing just one league game, thereby making it the shortest-lived franchise. And then
They got a fantastic name. I love American sport names. Like sometimes they try and import that into the UK, so you have like cricket teams or rugby teams kind of doing the American sport names, or like sometimes ice hockey. But it just sounds ridiculous in a European context or UK context. But in America, it's so fun. Your names, not just like football club or soccer club or whatever. You've got like, yeah, let's name it after the colour of the shirt we had to wear, or someone misidentifying the colour of the shirt. That's a name.
NFL history. The Dexys Midnight Runners of teams. The Green Bay Packers, however, would stick around, cementing itself as one of the most storied franchises in the league.
Are the Packers...
A team was founded with $500.
I don't know if this is true. I've heard the Packers were a bit different in the ownership structure. Like, do they have some kind of fan ownership thing? I may be making that up. Please correct me if I am, but I've definitely heard something about them.
Put up by a meatpacking company.
Meatpacking? That makes sense.
The Packers.
The Green Bay Packers were one of those first teams that stadium was constructed with football as its main sport being played in it.
No other team in the league has played in the same city.
So the name thing makes so much sense. Like there's so many soccer. I've used the word like I'm a traitor, but I've used the word. There are so many soccer teams in the UK which are nicknamed after kind of local occupation. So like Luton are the Hatters, Bristol are the Gases. I can't remember if that's Bristol Rovers or Bristol City. There's loads of them. So it's interesting, but you've got the same thing in America with the Packers.
Under the
Obviously Arsenal, the Gunners.
same name for as long as Green Bay has. Following the 21 season, 7 teams left the league and 4
It's
new
such a
ones
fast
joined.
turnover.
The Milwaukee Badgers, the Oorang Indians,
Badgers.
the Racine Legion, and the Toledo Maroons. The Staleys, meantime, made a good call and changed their name to the Bears. Their owner, George Halas, picked Bears because they originally were playing their games in the same stadium as the Chicago Cubs. Halas not only wanted to connect his new team to the more established baseball franchise, but he also reasoned that football players in general were bigger than baseball players, so the name made sense on multiple levels. But the even bigger
That's
name...
pretty cool. Although, like, if at some point they invent another sport which has even bigger players than NFL, then they got trouble because you already got Cubs and you got Bears. Like, what's one step up for a bear?
name change that took place that year was the leagues. The American Professional Football Association was out to be known forever on as the National
Also, it's
Football
still
League.
so based
I think a lot
kind
of
of
that
around
comes from
the Great
wanting
Lakes region.
to be looked at or viewed as a national organization.
As the 1923 season got underway, it did so without the Evansville Crimson Giants, who bowed out. The Cleveland Indians, Duluth Kellys, and St. Louis All-Stars all checked in. In 1924, 5 teams left. 3 joined, the cities of Frankfurt, Kenosha, and Kansas City all being granted membership in the league. A year later, though, Kenosha, Racine, and Minneapolis all left. The Blues changed their name to the Cowboys, Canton rejoined, and Detroit, Providence, Pottsville, and New York were all added to the mix. The Giants, the lone team to stick, making them the 4th oldest team in the league.
Tim Nara set up his storefront in the Polo Grounds, located on Upper Manhattan's Coogan's Bluff.
The New York Giants name came about really to attach pro football team with their Major League Baseball counterpart, trying to gain some of that fandom from Major League Baseball.
That means ultimately the name Giants was inspired by all the skyscrapers in New York. In 1926, 3 teams changed their names.
I was lucky New York had those skyscrapers, because if New York was really like flat and level, and they had to call them like the New York normals, or like the New York slightly below average height, that wouldn't work as a team name, would it?
Including the league's first ever champs, the Akron Pros, who switched to the Indians. 3 franchises were dropped, but the Racine Legion came back as
That's
the Tornadoes, and 4 others were also added. The Brooklyn Lions, the Hartford Blues, the Louisville Colonels, and the Los Angeles Buccaneers, marking the first time the league had a team out west, although they never actually played any games in LA.
Ultimately, the LA Buccaneers played as a traveling team and really took up shop in Chicago. Played out of that city and then traveled as a barnstorming team, really,
The NFL really shook things up the following season when it got rid of more than half of its member clubs. The Cleveland Bulldogs were back, and the New York Yankees were added. 12 teams now making up the young league. And yes, I said the New York Yankees. The NFL was down to 10 teams the next year, Duluth and Buffalo losing their spots in the league, while the Cleveland Bulldogs moved to Detroit and became the Wolverines. But they didn't last long, one of 3 teams to fold up shop the next season. Buffalo came back, and the Orange Tornadoes, Staten Island Stapletons, and Minneapolis Red Jackets all joined. Come on in. Now, as the NFL began its second decade in existence, the turnover of teams was starting to slow down a little bit. 3 franchises were dropped, 2 joined. The Portsmouth Spartans, who are known today as the Detroit Lions and are the 5th oldest team in the NFL. In 1931, the Cleveland Indians were back. However, the Red Jackets and Tornadoes dropped out. 1932 was another significant blip on the NFL timeline. The Indians, Steamrollers, and Yellow Jackets departed, and the Boston Braves were added, which you know today is the Washington Redskins. But by adding...
Although now they're not, are they? They're like the Washington something else. I can't remember what they changed it to. I know they changed it to something. Is it Commanders or Commandos or something?
Only 1 team and losing 3, the league was down to 8 teams. It was the smallest the league ever got.
We had the league really trying to protect itself and stay with fewer teams but have them more successful.
Then in 1933, the Cincinnati Reds were introduced to pro football, along with 2 Pennsylvania franchises that would establish permanent roots in the league. The Pittsburgh Pirates, who eventually changed their names to the Steelers, and the Philadelphia Eagles.
It's funny when you read the stories leading up to the first game that the team played. Blood Ray was very optimistic. We're a first-year team, but we're going to surprise people. Well, they went out and they played their first game against the New York Giants and lost 56-0.
Philadelphia owners Burt Bell and Lud Ray settled on the name Eagles in honor of the symbol used by the National Recovery Act that was part of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal that followed in the wake of the Great Depression.
Okay.
The 33 season was also when the owner of the Boston Braves decided it was time for a new name.
George Preston Marshall wanted to stick with the Native American theme, so he didn't want to keep the Braves name because that was the name of the baseball franchise, so he chose the Redskins.
That season was also the first in which divisions were created, which set up the first...
I mean, like, you look at that pitch, just how much mud is there? Like, it's like when you watch like soccer games from the 1970s in England, it's like they're playing in like a First World War battlefield. But the difference in pitch quality over the past 30 years is, just look at it, is incredible.
Divisions were created, which set up the first official NFL championship game.
Bears ball on their own 12-yard line.
Prior to that, the league champion was simply the team that had the best record at the end of the season.
Okay.
The Bears would represent the West, the Giants, the East.
So that is really interesting because in most, not all, most UK sport leagues, you essentially have the team which wins is the one that gets the most points straight up. We have none of this playoff stuff that you guys have. I think it's a really interesting way of running the league. Like it makes it more competitive, I suppose, is probably the argument. I think the solution that the UK has to competitiveness is to have promotion relegation, so then you have the bottom teams being relegated, so it's kind of like a battle against relegation and or for promotion, so more people are fighting for stuff. But it's a really, really interesting way of doing it. Like if you want to stick with the same number of teams and the same teams in the league, playoffs definitely do make sense.
With Chicago beating New York 23-21 for the title.
That game really was the beginning of the popularity of pro football.
The following year saw the same exact 10 teams return, marking the first time in the league's history there were no changes.
Yeah.
But mid-season, the Cincinnati Reds folded and were replaced by the St. Louis Gunners for the last 3 games. It would be the only 3 games they would play as an NFL franchise. Also in 1934,
Shames,
the
they got a
Portsmouth
cool
Spartans
logo.
moved to Detroit and changed their name to the Lions. The name.
Serious question: how do you guys feel about teams moving around? Because, like, I think I alluded to this in the introduction. But if soccer teams moved around the UK, if like you took a lit team out of London and put it in Liverpool or something, people would go absolutely ballistic. I mean, the only comparison, the only sort of time I can think that's happened is when Wimbledon kind of got split, and so Wimbledon was moved to Milton Keynes, and now called the Milton Keynes Dons. And that caused absolute outrage, and a kind of a rival club was formed by the fans called AFC Wimbledon, and Milton Keynes Dons have the nickname of the most hated club in English football because they're seen as a franchise. So how do you guys feel if like your team just gets up and leaves? Is it not really devastating? It kind of sucks for that can happen.
It was inspired by baseball's Detroit Tigers, though the team had a different explanation. Quote, "The lion is considered the monarch of the jungle, and we hope to be the monarch of the league."
Yeah.
From 1935 to 1936, the same 9 teams remained, but it was in 36 that the NFL held its first ever draft.
Before 1936, every player coming out of college was a free agent.
So that's another thing that's so interesting about American sports, the draft system. I mean, one of the ironies, the way you guys run sports is so much fairer than Europeans. I know Europe is generally seen as being sort of slightly more socialist and America slightly more free market, but it's kind of the other way around in sport. In that, in Europe, I mean, there are rules. Basically, if you're a rich team, you can buy the best players. Obviously, in America, that's not the case. You have the draft system. Kind of, my understanding is that the teams that do really badly the year before get the first picks. So it kind of keeps everyone more competitive and stops you having a small number of really dominant teams. I'm not saying which system is, either system's better than the other. I just think it's really interesting how we've settled on 2 very different styles, which kind of go against like the perception of our economic models.
And a lot of times, those players were going to the teams with the biggest checkbook.
The Eagles used the first ever pick on Chicago Maroons halfback and first ever winner of the Heisman Trophy, Jay Berwanger. But Berwanger would never play it down in the NFL. The Bears, who acquired his rights from the Eagles, were not able to meet Berwanger's salary demands, which ultimately led him to take a job in sales for a rubber company. It's true. 1937, the Boston Redskins made the move to Washington, and the NFL grew back to 10 teams, awarding a franchise to the Cleveland Rams. These are the same Rams that call Los Angeles home today. The name Rams came about because their GM at the time, Damon Buzz Wetzel's favorite college football team, had always been the Fordham Rams, so they simply copied it. As the 30s came to a close, the league was starting to stabilize. There were no changes to the NFL landscape in either 1938 or 39. But 1939 was monumental for the future of the league, even if its participants didn't realize it at the time.
The Brooklyn Dodgers hosted the Philadelphia Eagles before a crowd of 13,000 fans. Few, if any, in attendance even noticed the cameras of NBC station W2XBS.
I bet they did.
Their presence marked
big.
the first ever telecast of a professional football game.
The first ever TV broadcast was only seen in parts of New York, but the seed was planted. The game's financial...
I don't know how it was in America, but initially when TV was introduced in English soccer games, initially the league hated it because they thought it would destroy attendance. Ironically, it kind of did the opposite. It turned out to really boost the sport, but initially the league was really against having football, having TV cameras there.
The future, stability, and popularity were all secured with the marriage between the NFL and television.
Yeah.
The 1940 season was significant for 2 reasons. First, Pittsburgh traded in the Pirates nickname.
They changed their name to the Steelers because of a steel worker ultimately proposed the name Steelers, and that stuck, knowing that the steel industry was so big in that area.
That year also saw the first iteration of the now famous NFL Shield, the league unveiling the iconic logo for the very first time.
It's a cool
And the Chicago Bears introduced its first official team logo, a black bear running with a football. Now here's the thing, most NFL teams have updated their logos several times over. So if you pay close attention to the map, you'll see how those updates happen. The league's member clubs continued to remain steady until 1943. That's the season the Cleveland Rams suspended operations for a year, but did not fold. It was due in part because of so many of their players were drafted into...
This isn't fair. If you're playing football with rifles, these guys are going to win, right?
World War II.
Come on, it's not fair on the other teams.
Which is also what led the Eagles and Steelers to merge, taking on the unofficial nickname, the Steagles. Yeah!
The Steelers struggled for years and years. It took them a decade and merging with the Philadelphia Eagles before they had their first ever winning season.
In 1944, the Eagles were back on their own, But Pittsburgh was still on shaky ground, so they looked for a new team to merge with, and they found a willing partner in the Chicago Cardinals, the combined teams known as Card Pits. The league also added the Boston Yanks, the Cleveland Rams returned, and the Brooklyn Dodgers changed their name to the Brooklyn Tigers. In '45, the Cardinals and Steelers merger was over. Both teams went back on their own. But the Brooklyn Tigers and Boston Yanks joined forces to form a new team known simply as the Yanks. Like the previous two mergers, it didn't last long. In 1946, the Tigers folded, so the Boston Yanks were back on their own. That same season saw the Rams pack up and head west for the sunny skies of Los Angeles, marking the first time actual games were played in LA proper.
The Cleveland Rams won it.
And it's crazy just how based around kind of the Great Lakes region or the Northeast the NFL was for so long. I had no idea. I kind of assumed it was always like a national league.
Championship in 1945, and then their owner, Dan Reeves, moved them out to LA. This is maybe the only time that I can think of where a professional team won a championship and then moved locations.
1947 and 48 came and went without any additions, subtractions, or relocations. But in '49, the Boston Yanks moved to New York and became the New York Bulldogs. Then came the next big expansion when the NFL merged with the All-America Football Conference in 1950, adding 3 new teams. The San Francisco 49ers, the Baltimore Colts, though not the same Baltimore Colts franchise that would emerge a few years later, and the Cleveland Browns.
The Browns opened their season against the Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia, and with some 71,000 in attendance, most of them National League fans of former years, the Browns had shocked the professional football world with a rude 35-10 jolting to the Eagles.
The Browns formed in 1945, and they're the only team named after a person, the inspiration coming from Cleveland's first head coach and GM, Paul Brown.
Some people claim that it's more about Joe Louis being named the Brown Bomber, but I really do think in this area, Paul Brown is football, and his name really is the backing behind the Cleveland Browns being named the Browns.
The 49ers name, on the other hand, is more straightforward.
56,000 witnessed an encore between the Rams of Los Angeles and the San Francisco 49ers.
They were named after the settlers who ventured into the San Francisco area during the gold rush of 1849.
Joe the Jet Perry, and he's off on a sensational 58-yard gallop up the far sidelines.
The first incarnation of the Colts didn't last long, folding after the 1950 season. They were followed out the door the next season by the New York Yanks, who were replaced by the Dallas Texans. The Texans' stay in the NFL was brief. The team lasted just 1 season of play.
And this is the first time we got any team at all in the South or in Texas, right? I think, which is weird because I kind of think of there's so many massive iconic Southern teams, but up until this point there were none whatsoever.
The Dallas Texans, they're the last franchise to fold in the National Football League.
The league found its replacements for the Texans the following year when the second iteration of the Baltimore Colts emerged. And these Colts would have staying power, as they are the same Colts who have since moved to Indianapolis. Baltimore fans were given the opportunity to vote on a team name, and they stuck with Colts, not only as an homage to the team that had just folded a few seasons earlier, but as a way to honor the region's history of horse breeding. From 1953 to 1959, all was quiet. No new teams added, none dropped. 1960, however, was a pivotal year. The Chicago Cardinals moved to St. Louis, and we saw the birth of America's team.
Eddie LeBaron uncorks the Cowboys' money play.
And this is probably the most famous international team. Anyone who knows nothing about American football, they could probably still know what the Dallas Cowboys are.
Clark gathers in the long rollout pass, and in the race to the goal line, Frank's an easy winner.
The Cowboys originally were going to be nicknamed the Steers, but their GM, Texas E. Schramm, decided having a castrated bovine as a mascot might lead to some unwanted ridicule. So they shifted gears and were leaning towards Rangers instead. But because there was already a local minor league baseball team with that name, Schramm settled on Cowboys, and the rest is history. Even bigger than the Cowboys joining the fold was the emergence of the American Football League.
You know, as you look back at the year of 1960, you probably remember a great many sports events. However, I doubt that anything was more important than the establishment of the American Football League.
The AFL was originally made up of 8 teams. The Houston Oilers, who eventually became the Tennessee Titans, the New York Titans, who are now the Jets, the Buffalo Bills, the Boston Patriots, now the New England Patriots, the Los Angeles Chargers, the Dallas Texans, who would later become the Kansas City Chiefs, the Oakland Raiders, and the Denver Broncos.
They all wanted
So this is like a rival league, is it?
NFL franchises, but most of these owners had, enough money in their own right to start a franchise. But the league was very strategic about how they were going to expand, and so they weren't quite ready to expand yet.
The Broncos got their name from a fan who offered it up in a Name the Team contest. He noted the animal's toughness and said the Denver area was well known for its wild Broncos. Name the Team contests were a very popular way teams came up with their nicknames. They were so popular, in fact, it's how the LA Chargers came up with theirs.
At this time,
Definitely my favourite came up earlier was the Something Badgers. Like I love the self-confidence of a team that goes, we're not going to call ourselves Lions, we're not going to call ourselves Giants, we're going for Badgers. Just like a random medium-sized mammal.
passing to Norton, and it's good for a touchdown.
Team owner Baron Hilton reportedly liked the name so much, he didn't open another letter after coming across what turned out to be the winning submission. Barron told reporters he always liked the charge bugle cry that fans would bellow out at games.
Hey!
Buffalo had a team in the All-America Football Conference years before they went by the Bills. The Bills' nickname was a reference to Buffalo Bill Cody. When owner Ralph Wilson bought the team, he held a contest and picked Bills out of respect to the city's defunct AAFC team.
Fast action, skill, and precision teamwork bring spectacular thrills to the fans. Professional football at its exciting best.
74 fans voted for Patriots in their naming contest, connecting them to the men who originally fought to establish the United States as a country. Pat Patriot, the cartoon of a Minuteman preparing to snap a football, was drawn by a Boston Globe employee and was chosen as the logo soon after.
And it's away to Jimmy Coco in the end zone for the touchdown.
An Oakland woman originally submitted the winning entry to name Oakland's franchise, coming up with Señors. The name alluded to the old Spanish settlers of Northern California. But when it got out, there was so much criticism, even claims the contest was fixed, they decided to pick another one of the entries, going with Raiders, which they selected over Lakers. The following year, the Chargers jumped on the freeway and moved to San Diego, while the NFL added the Minnesota Vikings to its lineup, giving it an even 14 teams.
Hi, this is a Minnesota Viking football helmet. It was in the middle of a lot of hard-nosed football last year.
Minnesota got its name from their GM, Bert Rose, who recommended the name because Vikings were aggressive people with a will to win, and it would honor the Nordic tradition in the northern Midwest.
It doesn't take Tarkenton long to prove that he's one rookie who's here to stay. Ran past the Bob Delker, gives the Vikings their first touchdown in official league play.
The Vikings are the first team to actually use a region as their franchise name as opposed to the city that they play in.
No changes in 1962, but in 1963, the New York Titans changed their name to the Jets.
Let's go, 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 Jets. The
It's catchy.
will beat them all.
So why was that name changed? Or perhaps you can tell me.
They originally were going to name the team Dodgers, but got pushback from Major League Baseball. Gothams also got some consideration, but they balked when they realized it would get shortened to Goths. They almost got the name Boros, certainly an homage to the city's famous neighborhoods, but team officials worried opposing fans would translate it their own way and start calling them the Jackasses.
The management of the New York Jets welcomes you to the first football game at Shea Stadium.
Eventually they went with Jets, since they planned to play their home games in Shea Stadium, which was close to LaGuardia Airport. In 1963, the Dallas Texans relocated to Kansas City and changed their name to the Chiefs.
Professional football, that most fascinating, most exciting of all spectator sports, came to Mid-America in 1963 when the Dallas Texans became the Kansas City Chiefs.
Owner Lamar Hunt didn't pick Chiefs right away, also considering mules, royals.
Mules, that would be fantastic. It's a tough animal. It's a sort of a pack animal. It's not. I would have a lot of respect for a team which called itself the Mules.
And stars. He went with Chiefs because he said a large number of Native Americans lived in the area. Hunt may also have chosen it due to Kansas City's mayor, Roy Bartle. Bartle helped lure the team to Kansas City, and his nickname was, you guessed it, the Chief. Nothing changed in 64, nothing changed in 65. But in 1966,
England won the World Cup.
everything changed.
So I got off topic.
First, the Atlanta Falcons came on the scene.
Randy Johnson connected with Gary Barnes for the Falcons' first touchdown in championship play.
Over 500 different names were offered up by fans, including the Atlanta Peaches, the Vibrants, Lancers, Confederates, Firebirds, and Thrashers. The winning entry was submitted by
Probably good they didn't go for the Confederates in retrospect.
several people, but the winner of the contest was a school teacher whose entry described the Falcon as proud and dignified, with great courage to fight. She noted it never drops its prey, is deadly, and has great sporting tradition.
I think it's wonderful. The Falcons won.
I was real satisfied.
Gosh, I think it was great.
The AFL also expanded that season, adding the Miami Dolphins as its 9th team.
The Dolphins' debut must go down in football history as the most thrilling first play ever made by any new team anywhere. Joe Hour from nearby Coral Gables High School and a Georgia Tech alumnus takes the opening kickoff and races 95 yards for a touchdown.
Over 600 fans suggested Dolphins.
The ownership group liked that the dolphin was the smartest, fastest creature of the sea.
Being an expansion team, you needed a lot of things to perhaps draw people into it, and he would throw the footballs back out. So Flipper was cool.
But the biggest shift to take place that year came at season end.
Yeah, I get that starting line up here, get a program, football line up here.
When the NFL and AFL champions met to face one another in the first ever Super Bowl.
And this is it. The American
So this is, at this stage, two rival leagues, right, facing each other.
Football League National Football League Championship.
The Green Bay Packers beat the Kansas City Chiefs handily, 35-10, and professional football was on its way to taking over as the country's new national pastime.
The 1966 world title belongs to the big team from the small town.
In 1967, the NFL added yet another new team, this time in New Orleans, and fittingly, they were awarded their franchise on November 1st, which is All Saints Day. However, the name came from yet another Name the Team contest. Owner John Meekum acknowledged he chose it as a nod to the popular song When the Saints Go Marching In, which was a favorite among many of the city's street jazz bands.
Okay. So Southampton soccer fans, that's the team I support, Southampton. They also sing When the Saints Go Marching In. So it's a kind of little weird transatlantic connection. Go marching in, marching in.
It was the AFL's turn to grow in 1968, which is when they added the Cincinnati Bengals.
Down by 8 points with 1 minute and 54 seconds left in the game, Dewey Warren hit Bob Trumpy for a touchdown.
Team owner and general manager Paul Brown chose Bengals to honor a football team that played in Cincy from 1937 to 1941. He chose the nickname over the fans' most popular suggestion, the Buckeyes. 2 years later, in 1970, the NFL and the AFL finally merged, all 10 teams from the American Football League being absorbed by the NFL.
Most NFL players and coaches and administrators didn't look at the AFL as being in the same league as the National Football League and its club members. And so Super Bowl III, when the New York Jets shocked the world and defeated the Baltimore Colts, and then the Kansas City Chiefs winning Super Bowl IV, probably was the best thing for the league moving into its merger, because it really put both leagues on equal playing field.
The following year, the Patriots dropped Boston as its location identifier, swapping it for New England. Then from 1972 to 75, it was another quiet stretch for the league. But in 1976, the Seattle Seahawks and Tampa Bay Buccaneers joined the fold. A panel of sports writers, along with Tampa Bay owner Hugh Culverson, chose Buccaneers from an original list of more than 400 as a nod to the pirates who raided Florida's coastline in the 17th century.
That's real kind of you to forgive and forget the fact that you got raided by pirates and name your team after them. No hard feelings about the whole murder and plunder.
Seattle, meantime, received more than 1,700 unique suggestions, including the Seattle Skippers, the Pioneers, the Lumberjacks, and the Seattle Seagulls.
Seagulls?
Seattle GM John Thompson said they went with Seahawks because it suggests aggressiveness, reflects our soaring Northwest heritage, and wasn't
I can sort of see why you go for Seahawks over Seagulls, to be honest.
being used by any other major league teams. The NFL landscape then went unchanged until 1982, and that's when the Raiders moved south to Los Angeles. In 1984, the Baltimore Colts packed up and moved to Indianapolis. 4 years later, in '88, the Cardinals were on the move again, heading west to Arizona, initially going by the Phoenix Cardinals. In 1994, though, they went statewide, changing their name to the Arizona Cardinals. Then in 1995, the Rams took the Cardinals' place in St. Louis, and the Raiders went back to Oakland, leaving LA with no NFL teams. It was also time for expansion once again. The Carolina Panthers and Jacksonville Jaguars becoming franchises.
The Jaguars play their first NFL game against...
So I know like the NFL has been playing games in London for, I don't know, over a decade now, I think. And the Jacksonville Jaguars play so many games in London. So Americans, there's probably a reason for that. But yeah, they seem to be like the sort of probably the team that's played the most.
The Houston Oilers.
The Jaguars were the result of another fan contest.
Surprisingly, the initial concept for their logo on their helmet was very similar to the car Jaguar logo. However, shortly after, a cease and desist letter was sent by the Jaguar car company, and they decided to go with a different style logo.
The home opener for the expansion Carolina Panthers.
Carolina ownership chose Panthers because they believed it symbolized what an NFL team should be: powerful, sleek, and strong.
For the Panthers, the wait is finally over as they make their home debut today. And there's one thing on their minds: Carolina.
In 1996, the Cleveland Browns were moved to Baltimore. However, the Ravens would be considered a new franchise, with the Browns essentially suspending operations, keeping their colors, records, and history.
A record crowd expected in Baltimore as the NFL returns to this city for the first time since 1983.
Baltimore owner Art Modell attempted and failed to buy the Colts nickname back from the franchise that left Baltimore for Indy in 1984. So once again, a name the team contest was held. Ravens beat out the Marauders and the Americans, and was a nod to Baltimore native Edgar Allan Poe's famous poem titled The Raven. 1997 saw the Houston Oilers pack up and move to Tennessee, though they initially kept the name Oilers. They changed it to Titans in 1999. Their naming contest produced options like the Tennessee Tornadoes, the Copperheads, the South Stars, and the Wranglers, among others. Owner Bud Adams chose Titans because it reflected strength, leadership, and other heroic qualities. That same year saw the return of the Browns, who picked up right where they left off after missing the previous 2 seasons. Then in 2002, the Houston Texans were added, filling out the current 32-team league as we know it today.
They were really young too.
Fans who were crushed when the Oilers left are here tonight for their new team, the Texans.
The Texans became the 6th professional football team to use the name. Owner Bob McNair choosing it over Apollos and Stallions. The Texans logo, by the way, is the only one of the 32 teams that has never been tinkered with. For the next 10 plus years, it was nothing but teams altering their logos. Most of the changes pretty minor in nature. It wasn't until 2016 that the next landscaping alterations took place. The St. Louis Rams moving back to LA.
And this is after LA, which is what, the second biggest city in America, have been without a team for, I don't know, I can't remember exactly when they lost it, but like several decades, right? Which is kind of incredible.
Followed by the Chargers a season later. And finally, in 2020, the Raiders vacate Oakland for a second time, this time heading east for the desert, setting up shop in Las Vegas. Expansion, contraction, mergers, name changes. The NFL has seen it all in its first 100 years, and we can only imagine how far this map will stretch in the century to come.
So that was really interesting. I learned a lot. I'm going to keep this ending very, very short because I got to go and catch a train, and this actually went on slightly longer than I expected to. But yeah, please do subscribe, please do like, comment, all that good stuff. And I hope to see you on the next time where hopefully I can give you a proper outro. Cheers.